Alex. I am the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic, and we're so excited to have Jeremy Gordon and Megan Nolan here with us tonight to celebrate Sea Friendship. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping things to go over. We'll be doing a hand-raised Q&A towards the end, so think of your questions, hold on them tight, we'll get them answered. Afterwards, Jeremy will be signing and personalizing near where you checked in. We'll let you know when and where to line up for that. We gave you Post-it notes. You all know him. We give them to you anyway. Just keep that in mind. It's with reason. If you're joining us virtually on the live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Sea Friendship. In the description, if you're here, you can buy more copies. We have many, and we want to order more. You can only order more when you buy all of them. So Sea Friendship, the reason we're all here tonight, is a whip-smart novel about a young man who learns the devastating truth behind his friend's death, propelling him on an odyssey of discovery into the nature of grief in the digital age, the limits of memory, and the meaning of friendship. It introduces a new voice in fiction from a writer already known for his pitch-perfect cultural criticism, a depth of literary talent. Said depth of literary talent is the man himself, Jeremy Gordon, whose writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, Pitchfork, The Atlantic, and GQ. Born in Chicago, he currently lives in Brooklyn with his wife Jen. Sea Friendship is his first novel. Megan Nolan, our conversation extraordinaire, is an Irish writer based in New York. Her debut novel, Acts of Desperation, was an international bestseller, and her second novel, Ordinary Human Failings, which we also have here tonight for you to purchase, was published in 2023 and was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction, the Nero Prize for Fiction, the Gordon Burns Prize, the Royal Society of Literature Encore Award, and longlisted for the Women's Prize. She's currently at work on her first book of nonfiction. Thrilling. Wow. Without any further delay, please join me in
Hey everybody, I'm so happy to be here and so happy to celebrate Jeremy, and I'm very proud of him, and I know of you as well. I think we're going to start with a little reading and then we'll get into it.
All right. Thank you for indulging me tonight. It's very meaningful to see so many people I know and so many people I don't know, which is also great. The section I'm going to read is from about a third of the way through the novel, when my narrator Jacob is sort of getting started on this podcast project that will go in a different direction than he realizes, and he is sort of talking to a coworker about how he intends to do that. This reticence to fully engage with podcasting had informed my thinking about the podcast I was proposing, I told Reggie, my company's new producer, as he patiently listened through the other side of the screen. There was a clear story to be told and a clear investigation to be conducted, but maybe we could approach this podcast in a way that anticipated what I was talking about. The myriad distractions that made any devoted listening experience somewhat difficult for people like me, and structure the storytelling in a more disparate, ethereal way. I wanted to center the tragedy of Seth Terry's death from an accidental overdose, and the role of once buzzy indie rock guitarist Lee Finch in providing the fatal batch of heroin, and outline how a beloved honors student had wandered down such a ruinous path. But in my head, I also heard a series of overlapping voices, not even necessarily identifiable as specific people, an oral history summoning the deceased from the void to tell the full truth of who Seth had been in life and death, as well as who they themselves had been, in order to explore the ramifications of a tragedy within a community in ways that resonated beyond I was sad, or I was scared, or I thought about death, because every death made someone thinking about death, and I wasn't trying to hit the nail on the head, but uproot the nail altogether, in order to make people ponder the heavy stuff in a way they'd never pondered before. I hoped I didn't sound insane. My call with Reggie was only meant to get us on the same page, not serve as a formal ribbon cutting, but I was infected with the potential of what this project might be if it came to fruition, and with every spare moment to linger on what I'd learned, I became further possessed with learning more. I was empowered by my free time and drifting attentions. I could wander between moments like a director in the editing room, comparing footage and stitching my reel together until something finally made sense. Part of it was the pot, in the number of ways I consumed it in the city, popping low THC gummies between meals, nursing-infused seltzers, openly lighting joints on the street because someone had told me it was legal, although it wasn't. My medical leave was really a vacation, and vacation was about relaxation, and the ease of walking into a legal dispensary and purchasing the maximum allowable limit had, within hours, reverted me to my collegiate levels of consumption. Perhaps I was indulging, but I wasn't exclusively indulgent. I'd used the marijuana time as a means of expanding and organizing my thoughts as they webbed together, tugging one revelatory strand after another until I chased down what felt impossibly true. After Hamilton and I parted ways, I was killing time at Williams by petting his dogs and hoping for a text back when he suddenly asked me if I had anywhere to go in the next hour because a potential sex friend was coming over. And while he didn't mind if I hung around, he assumed there were other things I'd rather overhear on the tail end of my trip. I didn't want to be an ungrateful guest and was happy to scramble, even if it meant sitting by myself in an unfamiliar bar, scrolling my phone. I took an edible, and as I waited for some friends to show up, I started thinking about this and that, and before long was tunneling towards a series of conclusions about what type of person Lee must have been to expedite something so terrible, nearly trembling with how terrible I felt about it. High school was about discovering yourself, sure, but some of us hadn't ended up enabling the deaths of our classmates during that fact-finding process. I wanted to hear some kind of explanation for his behavior, how he pulled Seth into his orbit and encouraged his habit. More startling was how immediately my existing memories of Seth had shifted following my night with Kelsey. In the years since his death, the specific impressions I retained of him had faded into a more general recollection. But Kelsey's revelation had displaced those general recollections, filling me with overriding dread that I completely misunderstood him in the first place. There were whole swaths of his existence I wasn't privy to, things he'd never shared with me. Perhaps we hadn't been all that close, difficult as it was to accept, though who's to say my existing memories weren't a postscript invention, though who's to say postscript inventions weren't the default texture of our subconscious, considering the possibility of creating a truly objective record to our lived experience. But regardless, we shared some responsibility toward fidelity because life was too indelible to actively lie to ourselves about what had been. Well, whatever it was, I could no longer distrust my memories of Seth, because there was too much I didn't know or understand. Even after the pot wore off, I returned to the same conclusion. I needed to piece together what had happened so I might resettle some of this disturbed terrain. That's all.
Thanks, Ryan. Where do you get your ideas from? No, I'm just kidding. I wanted to talk about male friendship because one of the main ways that I find men scary and alien is that they're also isolated emotionally, and it seems really unnecessary and just like it to me, a person who's very emotionally incontinent, I can't really understand that way of living, and and I'm really, for that reason, I find it very moving when men are able to be friends with one another in a way that's like possibly kind of patronizing of me. But basically I wanted to ask if male friendship was like a central thing that you were thinking about when you started conceiving of the book, or if that was something that kind of developed out of the plot.
You know, it wasn't something that I had thought about too consciously because I suppose I've always taken for granted that I have male friends. Like, it's very obvious. Like, I do read these articles that come out and are like, men don't have friends. And then I send them to my friends and I go, couldn't be us, buddy. Like, I feel so grateful for your presence. And then my friend is also like, I love you too, man. And we kind of just go along with our days. But I think obviously in like writing about, beginning to write the book and having the initial ideas and developing it, it became clear that this is something that is on a lot of people's minds, I think, for the reasons that are political and cultural and all these things. But at the beginning, no, it was really just like kind of, I am lucky enough that it is just kind of in like the texture of my adult life. You know?
What do you mean by political, sorry, when you said that?
Well, just this whole, especially in the wake of the election, we have so much discourse, so to speak, being like, men, the loneliness crisis, this is why men went to the right, because they don't have friends, they don't know how to discuss themselves, and like, how do we get them in the same room and like loving each other and being open with their feelings and whatnot. And all of which is I suppose fair, but at the same time, you're just like, Jesus, we're really like litigating like friendship is like how do men do this? I mean, of course, I have sympathy for people who don't have friends. Mainly that's my feeling reading these articles. I'm just like, boy, that's tough. You can't just like call up your buddy and be like, let's tie one on, let's have a good time, let's talk about our feelings. Let's not talk about sports. I mean, I have so many male friends who don't watch sports, which I think is really good. But also so many friends who do watch sports.
Yeah, that's pretty honorable. That's the big headline of the event. Jeremy, friends with sportsmen and not.
Yeah.
Okay, I also wanted to ask you a bit about, because I was very curious when we had dinner last night, and we talked about like what you share before you're finished a draft, and I never show anyone anything that I've done until I totally finish it. And yeah, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about who you shared your drafts with and like how that impacted the process for you, and yeah, just like if your personal relationships shaped the way that your book eventually ended up.
Yeah, it was interesting. In retrospect, I realized talking to like many writer friends who completely hole up to themselves, I did not have like the fortitude for that. I felt like it was I finished a draft in like the middle of the late 2020, so sort of like deep winter pandemic lockdown, and was just like desperate for context. I feel like I just like email blasted like 6 or 7 of my friends being like, read this, but like sort of like varying demands of what I wanted. I think I have a couple friends who I'm like very close with is at a writing level, and I knew that they would sort of approach things on a level of like tonal fidelity and knowing if it felt like true to the Jeremy experience that I suppose they were accustomed to. And then I sent it to just a couple of friends, almost for no. It's not even like I chose them. I think I chose them because I knew that they would be like nice, but also unsparing if they needed to be. And I think I got some feedback in terms of just like plot or just things that just like weren't working. I mean, that's kind of what I said to everyone ahead of time. Was just like, I do not want edits, but I do just like, what's your vibe, man? Are you into it? Are you not? And that was helpful, and certainly in terms of just like confirming that I wasn't. I sort of basically forced all my friends to be like my writing workshop partners, like having not been to an MFA program or done many classes or anything. I was just like, no, you have to do this with me, and I'm not reading your work. You just read.
Are you good at being criticized?
Yeah, absolutely. I almost like I crave it. I like desire it. I think it's because and this is I think is where my background in like journalism and freelancing was like came in really helpful, because like the dynamic as a writer when you're being edited for money, you just kind of have to like say yes and do it. I think, and almost unanimously, the writers who just like put up a fight about edits are the ones who everyone hates. And I think I just sort of like deeply like understood that. It's not personal. I mean, it's all just like editing. I mean, I had almost like no ego about it in terms of like, it's a difference of opinion, and everyone's trying to help me out. I mean, I've also had the luck of like being edited by people who are wonderful. So even when a friend was like very critical, I could like understand that it was coming from a good place, as opposed to like, this guy's just messing with me. He's always been jealous. He's always been mad. There's none of that.
Yeah, Daniel.
Hey.
I found it really moving how the sort of like quasi-romantic way that Seth is described by Jacob in the book, and I've been thinking a lot about like the formative like people that I thought were cool when I was a teenager, who I guess when I was in my early adulthood I was like, that was so silly when I was obsessed with that 16-year-old boy when I was 12, but actually those things are really crucial and like did change my life in many ways that are still relevant. And yeah, I wondered if you could talk about like, if you had any crucial peers that you found like revealed a way that you wanted to live or be.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I had those people at like all stages of my life. Even now, I sometimes meet people, I'm like, wow, that guy's just like the coolest. That's great. But certainly when you're younger, I mean, and you have like such little experience with anything, it doesn't take that much for someone to just be tremendously impressive. Like, I remember the first time I met someone who liked Pavement in real life, and I was like, wow, you like that band? Like, they're so cool. And like, now I live in Brooklyn, and I know like dozens, if not hundreds of people who like the band Pavement, and it's just like not as impressive anymore. But at that time, you're just kind of like sucking up via osmosis, like other people's personality. At least that's how I did it. I feel like I was just like doing a lot of observing, and then at some point, the me of it came out eventually.
Did you want to be a writer when you were a kid?
Yeah, I did. I was like, unfortunately, one of those like stereotypical nerds who was always reading a book under the desk. And I think when I was a kid, writing stories and whatnot, and getting a little older, and really just kind of experimenting with a lot of different formats. I mean, I was doing journalism, like criticism. I think at one point I was trying to write comic books, and also like doing fiction. It was all coming out in some form, and then I just kind of kept stumbling from one thing to another until it clicked.
Was that like normal? I don't mean normal, but was your family open to you doing having a bad career, which is being a writer?
No, it's I'm very grateful to my parents for the support, I suppose. I mean, I think my dad was a working musician his whole life, and after he passed, like my mom was pretty supportive. I mean, I think there were moments when. And honestly, I'm tremendously grateful because, she spent this money on my education, and I moved in with her after a year of being deeply broke in New York. I had to go back home, and I was like, you know what? I think freelance writing is the thing that's going to get me out of this mess and get me out of this house. And that's very impractical, obviously. But she never really pushed me to get a job, which is I think not traditionally how a lot of parents, certainly ones who come from immigrant backgrounds, whose moms were very unsparing and whatnot. But I think there was just a part of her that was she was going to encourage it as long as it didn't seemed like it was leading to obvious failure, and then I luckily never got to that point, and then here we are.
Yeah, I was in a similar position when I was about 26, where I quit my admin job and moved to London, and I had no money, and then my dad was like, "What are you gonna do with your life?" And I was like, "I'm going to be a freelance writer now." And he was like, "Okay, how are you going to do that?" And this is before I had any bylines whatsoever. And I was like, "I'm gonna DM some people on Twitter. That's what I'm gonna do."
It works. I mean, like literally, when I was trying to get started, I sent like cold emails to just like writers who I really liked and was like, "I really like your stuff. I think I'm not terrible. What advice would you give to like a 22-year-old who has no money and no bylines?" And some people were decent enough to respond, which is I have tremendous gratitude for today. Which is why I always try to like read my emails, because you just got to do it. It's just the job of is reading the emails. Yeah.
You gotta retrieve them all.
Yeah.
I was really interested in how like the way that the internet shapes like memory and nostalgia in your book, and about sort of like enshrining things. I really gather objects in like a sentimental way, and like have a lot of crap that I carry from country to country. And I guess I was wondering about what your relationship to like ephemera is, either online or offline. Like,
oh my god, it's awful. My apartment is just like crammed with garbage that I've like lugged. Like I have literally my wife and I moved into our apartment like 2 years ago, and I still have like at least one unpacked box of just like stuff, and it doesn't go anywhere. It's just like things. I like have like I went to like an Arizona Diamondbacks game, and they gave you it's baseball, and they gave like a little tail that's shaped like a rattlesnake's tail and just shakes. And I got this like a decade ago, and it's just objectively crap, and yet I still hold on to it because I'm like, boy, that Arizona Diamondbacks game, that was a good time. I drank too much and I threw up, and it was I remember so much from this. I can connect so many things to this evening in Arizona, but I try to be better about it. I mean, I think I've gotten better about being less sentimental with garbage over the years, because sometimes it truly is just garbage. I mean, I have this is the last recollection I'll do, but I came across this the last time I was at home in a drawer, and it's just like a patch of a piece of like someone's blue jeans, and I'm like, why do I have this like dirty denim just like sitting around? And it was a piece of denim that like the cool punk girl that I was like friends with in high school when we were like sophomores, she was just like, look at me, and just like cut off her pant leg and like handed it to me. And I took it and I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then like stuffed it in my drawer, and then every time I pulled it out over the next like 15, 20 years, I was like, I can't get rid of this. Like Susie gave this to me. Again, it's just dirty. It's a dirty piece of like blue jeans, but like, it's I love it. I can never get rid of it.
That's really funny, because my equivalent of that is that when I was 12 and was obsessed with the 16-year-old boy who was Jason Grant. He's not here, it's okay. And he's in Ireland, and he was a punk guy who was like really into Mudhoney and stuff, and I thought that was very cool. And he was like very depressed looking, and it was like the last day of, we were both in this like summer theater camp thing together, and everyone like signed, they were signing each other's shirts or whatever, and then he signed my jeans and wrote "Punk rock will never die" on my jeans,
so
and then I cut that out of my jeans and put it in my journal, and I still have that.
That's very moving. I mean, that's like a movie in itself right there.
I wanted to ask about like setting obviously not all about Chicago in your book, because I'm really interested in like when I find it very impressive and bizarre that anyone can ever set anything in a place they haven't lived, basically. And part of why I don't do that is partly just I don't feel the authority to write about places I haven't lived, but also it feels really fun and pleasurable for me to like revisit a place that I don't live anymore. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wondered also I wanted to ask how long it has been since you lived in Chicago and how it was to revisit it.
Yeah, well, I go back to Chicago a couple times a year to see my mom and other assorted things, but I haven't lived there since 2012, and even then I was living in my mom's house, so it's like not the same of like being out in the world. And partly the setting was inspired by having like the real life emotional experience of like every time I'm back in town, someone is like, where should we go? And I'm like, I have no idea. Or I have like friend, where should we meet as a restaurant or bar? And I'm like, there's absolutely no, like I know my local like Irish bar, but I know the places that my friends who live here know, but I cannot do any sort of independent research. And at this point, I mean, I have friends who've lived in Chicago who are transplants and have lived there like at this point more a decade straight and are have so much authority and knowledge, and I'm not territorial in the sense of like those dickheads, they don't know the city. Like they know it better than me at this point. I mean, everywhere I go it's just sort of like places I used to go to that are, some are still open, but some of it is like now a Kmart or something. That's strange.
Yeah, my reaction to what you're talking about, like in Dublin and London, which are two places I lived for more than 10 years, is to now defensively be like, well, those cities are bad actually, and once I left, they became bad, and there's no reason I should know about them anymore.
Yeah, I have this worry sometimes about like if and when I ever leave New York and then coming back to like, you know, Bushwick and walking over some trash piles and just like, man, like it's just the same as it ever was, and being like nostalgic for garbage, like again, it's some point in my life.
So okay, I've been seeing a bunch of this, you know, like Gen Z people being like romanticizing 2010s BuzzFeed, Vice heyday era, which is kind of when you and I both started to be journalists, I guess. And yeah, I guess it's always horrible it's horrible for young people to romanticize a past that they weren't there for, or to like perceive us in any way, really. But how do you feel about that era? Because I have a lot of different feelings about it, and not very coherent ones. But yeah, I wondered if you have like affection for it or what you think about it.
I gotta stop. Like I do that thing that, you know, the episodes of The Simpsons, I think it's Lollapalooza, where like the guy asks his friend, like, are you even being sarcastic? Like I don't know how I feel. Like I feel when I reflexively make fun of it, I'm like, you know, it was 2010, Four Loko was in the stores, and it had all of its caffeine, Sleigh Bells' first record was out, you know, it was just like, it was never better than this, and I think to myself, like, was it ever better than that? And the answer is yes, it got much better than, like, original Four Loko and, like, Sleigh Bells, but, like, I understand why people, like, I mean, mostly I think I'm just touched to the fact that, like, people are now, like, nostalgic for things that, you know, first-hand experiences. Like I saw some viral tweet the other day that was like, I should have been like a millennial Pitchfork reader, like following best new music in 2011. I was like, I was there, and it was like pretty good. You know, it was a good time. We went to some shows. Like I can't complain, but I don't think you need to be like that nostalgic for it. You know.
But wait, that doesn't make you feel sad and close to death that they're doing that?
It does imbue me with the power of like. I don't know, I guess like, yeah, it's like power, I suppose. Like, yeah.
Power? Really?
Yeah, you're like, I was at that concert, I was there. Like, literally, it all just comes back to like the LCD sound system thing. Like, I was there, and like, you can just like finally claim something, and that was ours. I think the thing that really worries me is like, with the next generation looking back, like, what about like 2020s culture is like, the future teenager going to be like, boy, I should have been listening to like the Charlie XCX like COVID pop album like in lockdown, like that was like what's up. I mean, maybe, you know, are people going to be nostalgic for like COVID music?
Yeah.
And children? I don't, they might be.
Yeah, I had this thought when we were at Warheight's birthday party, and there was like four of us sitting around smoking chocolate milk flavored vapes and talking about Joe Biden. I was like, wow, I'll remember this moment. Yeah.
Yes, you really will. For better or worse.
Okay, I wanted to ask maybe one more thing before, okay, great. Okay, cool. So I also wrote a book while being a journalist full time, and it took me fucking forever because my brain is not very good at those two things at once, and I wasn't on contract with the book, so I had to do it, you know, alongside or whatever. So yeah, I wanted to know about how that process worked for you, and yeah, kind of vague time frame for how you worked it all out.
I was really lucky because when I started writing it, I was still employed at this website called The Outline, which no longer exists. But when it did, it was like kind of sundowning quietly. Like, I mean, we were all doing a lot of work, but I can say this now because we've all been laid off. But like, truly, there was like so many days where I just like would be done with work by like 1. And it's not that I was like doing like quiet quitting. Like I just genuinely had nothing to do. So I would just be like sitting there writing. At first, I started to exercise, and I was like, "This is terrible." I'm not doing this. So I started like writing this book, and then we all got laid off like 6 months into that, and then I was just unemployed and in COVID, and just I was beginning to freelance a little bit, but then just kind of committed to it. And then even as I kept on compiling like different jobs, whether freelance or temporary things, like I would somehow always find the space to just commit to it in the morning. I've always been kind of productive, I guess, a little busy bee, which I'm not that proud of, but also it's nice when you like can just like set something up and you just be like, I'm very good at like knowing like, okay, like this is the thing I need to do today, and I woke up, I feel great, I have coffee, I'm just gonna get after it and not like use an excuse and be like, oh, you know, I'd rather sit there. I mean, I'd rather do so many things, but actually, that's not true. When it was really cooking, I'd be like, boy, nothing's better than this. Like, I got the coffee brewing, I got the draft going, I have no demands on my attention. And then someone sent me an email with like an assignment, and then I would have to break off. And that was like, I think there's no, the ultimate conclusion I learned is that I don't like working. I don't like having a job.
Yeah.
And no matter what it is, it doesn't matter like what industry, and any sort of like demand on my time is upsetting to me. But nonetheless, I do it because I have to make money. It all comes back to I just like this cycle of like very basic things like need money to pay for food and rent.
Yeah.
But I don't want to make the money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you should enable Jen to quit her job and support her, I think. Wait, what was I going to ask? Jobs, work. Oh yeah, the way that I'm really not a productive person at all. But the way that I do ever force myself to do anything is that I imagine my dad and God watching me and being upset with me for what I'm doing.
That's a good way to do it. What I do is I think I turn on my PlayStation and I see it says like the hours played on like whatever game I play, and I look at like Elden Ring or my tennis game, and it's like you played 800 hours over the last 2 years. And I'm like, that's just fucking pathetic. Like, you should be like, writing more. So I motivate that way.
That's good. Do you have? I won't ask you to tell. I feel like it's too early for you to talk about your second novel unless you want to. But do you feel like you want to write like different sorts of book every time, or do you feel like you have a consistent tone that you want to?
Yeah, it's
pursue?
interesting. I am working on a second book, and it's pretty different. I think I was talking to my agent, and his direct feedback was like, it seems like it starts out like it could be a follow-up, and then like swerves wildly, and that was very nice to hear. It's still in the first person, and there's still like some commonalities, but yeah, I don't know. I think I have like a lot of ideas, and luckily, I think if writing this taught me anything, is that you have to like really like something in order to write it for a long period of time, which sounds like dumb when you say it out loud, but you don't know it until, I mean, as you know, like really just stick with it for like years at a time. So I have like a set of ideas that I've like whittled away at for many years in my head, and now I feel like they are like good enough to still pursue, and they're all a little different. But Chicago takes place, is involved in some way. Male men and the subject of men.
There's men in the next one?
There is a man in my second book, maybe even two men, maybe three, no more than that. But yeah, so I think that's the goal for now. To just like keep trying it.
If you had limitless money, would you just write books, or do you have love for journalism? Would you continue to want to do any journalism if you didn't need money?
Yeah. I definitely would like to do it. I think writing books full time, it's really, I do, if I do have like my mother's influence in the back of my head somewhere, it's just like needing to like make a living, because
but in the fantasy that I'm describing,
you don't
need that.
Where like I didn't have to, I mean, honestly, in the fantasy where I didn't have to make money at all, would I have a job? Like, no, of course not. Like, my journalism, I mean, I would write like criticism and like features and whatnot. I think like a daily job would be less appealing.
Do you ever write book reviews?
Yeah, definitely. I did it when I would freelance, and it was so fun. Except the problem is that like the cost benefit, like the financial math.
Oh, I know,
is
that's
just,
the worst.
like,
Yeah.
makes no sense. But I would love it so much. I'd be like writing these like multi-thousand-word drafts for like The Nation, being like, this is great, and then I like crunch the math, and I'm like, they pay a great rate, but at the same time, it's like when you think about all the time that like it goes into it, and then I would do these like sponsored content things that would take like a tenth of the work and pay like 5 times as much, and be like, this is not tenable for anyone.
Does it make you feel any different about criticism to have something that can now be criticized?
I immediately turned around. I was like, boy, I'm on the other side of like the perception machine. It's not so fun, is it? But then my conscience was kind of clean, because I don't think I ever panned anyone who didn't really deserve it. Like, I think that was like, even as a critic, that was always kind of like my guiding motivation, is like, you should only criticize people who like seem like they are like ontologically down, like bad. I mean, that's not true. I criticize. Of course I criticize stuff that I wasn't into, but like the only people who I really laid into was like stuff that I found like kind of like morally offensive on some level, as opposed to just like. I mean, I was working at Pitchfork for several years, and it's hard to be like, not write like a snacky review when you're giving someone like a 6.1. But at the same time, it's like, well, you sort of put yourself up for appraisal. I mean, I think that was honestly the perspective I had. That is like. Now, obviously, I want everyone to be nice to me, but I do understand the like math of it. Was like, well, you've sort of put yourself out there, and you just kind of have to take it. And but, I love to quote this scene in the movie Cloud Atlas where Tom Hanks is playing like a reformed British gangster who gets a bad book review, and in order to like strike back the guy, he just throws him off like the roof of this hotel, and just like goes to jail for it. It's a great scene, great man. The movie's fine, but I'm just like, boy, like, I'm gonna go Tom Hanks and Cloud Atlas. We're just threatening to murder someone. But, it's in good humor. It's like my attitude. I was like, I'll get in your face, man. Like, I've been here before.
Jeremy last night did an impression of him being aggressive for some reason that I can't now remember, and it was really charming. heartwarming, I have to say.
I would love to know.
I think we were talking about me or somebody else being like annoyed by a man in a public place, and then you were sort of like get out of here, man. Yeah, that's it.
Wants you.
It's very scary. And on that bombshell, we will start taking questions now. Hey.
Hi. First of all, answer my email. I'm a young writer. The second of all, I have a question about craft. I'm writing about a city and a group of people who are like a part of a demographic. How do you differentiate characters' voices from one another when you are coming from the same place, same milieu?
Mm-hmm.
Was that a conscious decision? How did that feel for you?
I'm going to just repeat the questions, by the way, for the live stream. So the question, I'm going to do a bad job of summarizing this, but if you're describing people of a similar demographic, how do you differentiate their voices and like have them be distinct people? Or
Yes.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think the three main cities where the book takes place are Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. And without stereotyping too much, like I do just kind of associate different personalities and different like vibes. Like New York people are very like kind of aggressive and in your face about and like kind of like career minded in a way that doesn't always manifest as like being career minded, at least like in this writing world of mine. And then people in Los Angeles are like just like a little sunnier and more put together. Again, like painting with very broad strokes, but it was like like New York, aggressive, LA, positive, Chicago, apathetic. Because I feel like everyone I know who's in Chicago is just like very like confident in themselves, very relaxed, and it's kind of how it shakes out in the book. Like the characters from those places do take on the traits of their city, and I think there was something to like all the characters in the book are sort of like millennial middle class drivers, and I think there's a degree to which like as mirrored in real life, in my friends at least, like they had sort of passively taking on like the professional traits of the world that they wanted to enter. So if you went to New York to get a job as a writer, you probably are like a little turned on in that way of just like being really yappy and together. If you go to like LA to be in the creative arts, like you're a little bit more woo-woo and hanging out, just hanging out, trying to have a good time in sunny Los Angeles. And then Chicago, you're just like working, it's like doesn't even matter what, like there's no like professional, like I don't know anyone in Chicago who's like pursuing like they're all pursuing the creative thing. No, let me rephrase that. They're all pursuing all pursuing their creative stuff like on the side. Like it's not like their job, which I think is like really different. So it doesn't define themselves professionally in the same way. It's supposed to like, you go to New York and it's like, I work at BuzzFeed, like I work at Vice, like I also work at BuzzFeed. It's just this like cavalcade stuff, at least in this demographic.
Yeah, no, I agree. Everyone in Chicago should die. There's no point in them. Yeah.
The greatest city in the world, other than New York.
Anyone else have a question? Yeah.
So when you're a freelancer working with an editor, it's the editor who gets the final word. So you kind of have to say yes. But when I assume like you're a novelist and you're having your friends read your work, like you ultimately get to arbitrate who's right and who's wrong. And so when someone told you something wasn't working, like how did you process that? Because like you want to be true to yourself, but you also do want to take that on board, in the spirit of Matt.
So question is, you're saying as a freelancer,
Just like the relationship between the readers, you and the readers is different when you're like a journalist with an editor and a
right.
like fiction author with a reader.
Right. So I guess like how do you receive the?
Yeah. Where did I find the line? It depended. I think, unfortunately, I'm really good at like disagreeing, like knowing the tone, how to like disagree with someone. There were certainly things that I pushed back on in the edit, but it came mostly. I mean, maybe this is just like a bad approach. Like, there's definitely writers who'd be like, you gotta like stick to your word. It's your book. But like, honestly, like it was a nice collaborative process. Like, there were a lot of good suggestions that were made by like my wonderful editor Sophia and like the copy editing team, like my agent. There was just like a lot of good feedback. But then I think when I think it was because like there were things that I absolutely did not want to give in on, and that was very identifiable. So once you know and similar with like in journalism, I know that dynamic of like, okay, I'm okay with saying yes on this stuff, but I absolutely need to maintain this other thing. And just being able to identify that really quickly made it easy for me to not be like a pill. Because ultimately, someone's job to like also do this. Like I'm not, I was very aware of the fact that I would be like the most attuned to this, more attuned to this than like anyone could ever be. So I was just trying not to like make someone's life miserable. They're like, what'd you do today? Like, oh, this like asshole's just like arguing over this one word, and like you just wouldn't say yes. So, trying to avoid that.
Did you have any substantial disagreements, or like anything that you felt strongly about the?
There was one exchange. It wasn't even a disagreement really, but I did stand my ground. It's so sad, but there's early on. There's a character. Jacob or someone is recollecting a conversation they had in 2006 and is like paraphrasing like the words that someone else, this person used. And like back in 2006, like the guy uses like a problematic word to refer to a disabled person. We can all know what the word is. And the copy editor was like, for sensitivity concerns, we want to like, we usually try to take that out. And I was like, listen, it's a terrible word. It's a terrible thing to say. I'd never say it in real life. If it was put in the words of someone in the present day just being casual and funny, that's one thing. But this is like, we must maintain fidelity to how teen boys talked in 2006. Unfortunately, this is part of the lexicon. And it just happens once. So like my conscience is pretty clean as opposed to just like, I just came up with a way to just constantly be saying this word over and over and over again. That'd be a little strange. But, I was like, it's earned, I think.
Yeah, that's what book 2 is
fine,
Anyone else? Yeah.
So I know it was COVID when you were writing the book, but were you like seeing or watching or reading anything that you were viewing as like inspiration, or were you more like trying to engage the process, or like trying to like separate your time of like I'm writing my draft and then I'm like relaxing?
Yeah,
or were you
yeah.
like kind of seeking things out from the time, or
So the question was, did you find any inspiration from things you were seeing or reading or watching at the time when you were writing?
Yeah, it was hard for me because I'm very impressionable. I feel like I'd be reading a book that was like so wonderful and so different from mine, and then just like turn to Jen and be like, boy, like I'm cooked. I gotta give it. I gotta like. I would just be like, I gotta stop reading this book because it's just making me feel bad about like everything. I was reading like 2666 by like Roberto Bolaño. So we're like rereading it, and I was like, boy, like it's a masterpiece. Like what am I doing here? And I was just like, oh right, like I'm not like books are very different. There's many books is what I learned in the course of writing this. But in terms of like then conversely, I would latch onto things that were inspiring in a way that was like productive as opposed to just like feeling oppressive. Like I read this book by this Norwegian writer Lena Anderson called Willful Disregard. It's about this like newspaper writer, this art critic who basically just like goes gaga for this famous artist, and she just like makes a fucking fool of herself. But like she doesn't know that she's doing that, but like the writer and like as the reader knows that. And like something about the prose of that like really was like had me like locked in. I'm like, okay, this is like a good portrait of a person who's like a little delusional, but like doesn't know that. Like that's helpful. Or I was really reading like early on, I was reading the Eve Babbitt's short story collection, Black Swans, which is like very different, but I don't know I assume in a room like this, most people have read Eve Babbitt's, maybe that's not fair. But she wrote all these books that are about like, early books are about like the LA party scene in the 60s and 70s, but then Black Swans is this book that was published in the early 90s, and it's all short stories just about like things that happened like way long ago. Like by this point she was like out of the scene, probably like had not gotten rich off of writing whatsoever, and she was writing about everything with just this tone of like, this just happened, like it was not, and there's almost like no like sentimentality or anger or anything. She was just sort of like almost like freewheeling like emotions of just like depicting things in a very neutral way. Stuff that was like very helpful as well. And so that was what kind of like brought me back to like continuing to read as opposed to just like giving up on it while I was doing edits. Just the hopes of finding one good book that would remind me what was going on.
I think we have time for one or two more. Does anyone have a question? Yeah.
A lot of the books that deal with the internet and the technologies that have shaped our life over the past 2 decades do so with this kind of like willful openness. And I was wondering if you could talk about your decision to engage with this with more specificity.
Could you repeat that? Local what? Sorry, say that again.
Oh, just many of the books that deal with the internet and the technologies that have shaped our lives over the past 2 decades do this like really vague way where they won't name them or they'll just like talk about them kind of like paraphrastically. And I'm wondering if you could talk about your decision to engage really directly with them.
So the question, sorry, I'm just repeating for the live stream, is so how did you decide, or how did you find a way to, or how do you feel about being specific about referring to like cultural things, or?
Like the title is based on
Yeah.
Right.
email, all these things like a lot of people kind of step back from.
Yeah, I think it was just as simple as like coming out of the tail end, coming out of like the other side of having used these things like very naturally for the longest time, with had like one specific you know, like if you were on Twitter and you were trying to share a post, you called it, I retweeted someone. And for 10, 15 years, that was just what you said. You retweeted something. But now Twitter is called something different. And it's very plausible that there will be new users of X, the Everything app, that will like, they just say like, I reshared a post. And like the word retweet will be like as archaic as anything else. But at the same time, it is something that like millions of people know how to use instinctively. And Facebook, the same thing of just like, you know, to like something or poke someone, like all these like tools that were at one point like just part of the texture of living, but then are swiftly irrelevant. And I think, you know, the thing that I was preoccupied with is what happens when a book or when a technology becomes like obsolete. Because like to me, you know, the title of for anyone who's not familiar, like the See Friendship is like a tool on Facebook that allows you to essentially see like the entirety of your interactions with another person that you're Facebook friends with, like all your history, all your shared statuses and photos. And like I would say that almost nobody who I talked to had ever used this or heard of this. Like it's just like buried somewhere like on the site. And so, you know, here's this thing that these people, the engineers, spent like hundreds of thousands of hours like developing, and then it's just like something that the prime demographic of using it, like millennials of a certain age, just like don't you know about it because they don't have Facebook accounts anymore. Like it's, and because the platform itself is just kind of like hulking dinosaur that is fallen into disrepair, except for like AI slop being like peddled out to grandmothers. So I think like for me, just like keeping in mind, I was just like interested in like, yeah, how to capture that in a way for people who actually remember what the words mean for now.
I used it for everyone I ever dated, if that makes it better. One more, yeah. Anybody? No? Okay. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and thanks everyone.
Sorry. I wrapped that.
Oh,
That's my
I
bad.
got it.
Do this every night.
Oh, boy.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to Jeremy and Megan. We have more books for you to buy. If you're looking live stream still, you can buy it in the link in the description. If you're here, you can buy it at the register. We've got so many. There's holidays coming up, I'm sure. There's birthdays, Passover's coming up.
Gotta do St. Patrick's
You
Day.
definitely buy St. Patrick's Day. I'm not going to think of others. My wonderful coworkers are now pointing to where Jeremy will be signing and personalizing books. I know you're also excited to congratulate him and celebrate, but if you could just hold on until we get the signing line started so that we can start getting things swiftly, because we are going to start putting the store back together as soon as you stand up. And thank you all so much for coming, and buy books, and buy Megan's books, and have a great night.
Please buy our books. Please.